Take a breath. Let me lead you down the path of mist and memory, the path that leads us back down to our beginning. A path where millions have trod before. Follow me, if you dare, down this mythic and winding path, to a place and time where gods walked the land, where men were judged by their deeds and their actions, not by the words spewing from their mouths. A time and place on the edge of the sea, where the Jarl Whitgar lived, with his hearthwaru, his bodyguard and advisors. Whitgar, in his prime, was a warrior to be feared. He crushed his enemies and kept his people safe. The rivers and sea ran with salmon. The elk in the woods multiplied and were culled. The goats gave up their milk with the minimum of fuss for a goat. The land was at peace. Each knew their place. They followed the old ways, ways that had worked since the times long ago of their ancestors and ancestors' ancestors. And let me tell you a story of Whitgar and his pride. As many men do, Whitgar coveted power. His men wore the scaly, bright, briny metal armour, carried the dawn-sharp swords. His spears shimmered in the light of the lamps of his hall. His people were content with their lot, as is the lot with people. They did not know any other way. And Whitgar kept them safe, and their animals multiplied, and their children grew. One day, at the start of the summer, a young woman moved into the woods at the edge of the village. She came and paid her respect to Whitgar and his men. She was a woman of the woods, a healer, a volver, a kuninga. Her hair braided in thick black tresses, her dress stitched with simple flowers around the neck, and her throat glittered with a silver chain with amber beads. Her wrists chimed with wood, bone and silver. Her name was Daga, and Whitgar took her offering of mushrooms and balm for his protection. He granted her permission to live in the wood's edge and make her life with her twin dogs, Gesemi and Nos. For, in his pride, Whitgar thought nothing of the raven-haired woman of the woods. He had sharp steel and strong arm, and the weight of ages backing his power. And as the seasons turned, as they wont to do, the fish were smoked, the deer hunted, and occasionally a boar was speared. The grain grew strong, the herbs sweet. The men went to war and came back singing their songs. The women mourned and the children grew. Life moved on much as it did before. Dea built her life in the woods. She made ointments in the eaves of the yew. She made potions with oak and sun spattered water. Raven and magpie supped at her door, and her twin black dogs bathed in the sun. And the people came to her. The people came to have their ills tended, from sword slash to eye black, from boil to cramp, from bleed to birth. The people came. They gifted Dea bright silver and deep roots. Her dogs ate the offal of the hunt, and she drank the nectar of the bees. Life was good, and Whitgar and his men rubbed their lineaments on old wounds, Dea's magic dispelling the remembered pain. Whitgar deemed it a worthy tax for his protection, his strong arm. As all people know, when the good times come, there must also be a time of strife and struggle. This is the way of the gods. It is a mark of one's character, how one tolerates and manages this time of pain and strife. And in Whitgar's land, this was no different. One summer, the goddess Suna shone. From the rise of the bluebells to the fall of the leaves, she did not stop. The river began to run dirty and shallow. The deer became scarce and thin, the grain brittle and hard. Goats were goats as goats are wont to be. The cold months were not harsh, but the rains did not fall, and the people began to hunger and suffer. Whitgar in his hall saw this, and his men went to raid the other villages, but all the land suffered under the sun's relentless hammer blows. And within the woods, Dea made her potions, cast her runes, and picked her mushrooms. For the life of the vulva does not stop with the sun. Then, when the days became longer and the rains did not come, the river was foul and muddy, the wells dry. The people came to Dea for her healing herbs of Bethany, plantain, nettle and daisy, herbs of heart, of belly, of bone and skin. Whitgar could not provide for his people, as the food stores ran short and the trees bore no fruit. The game moved away and the people suffered. Dea, she of the woods, made her potions at the roots of the yew and oak. She harvested the honey from the bowl of the ash. She drank the sap of the birch, and she shared her abundance. And the people thanked her and spoke of her to all who would listen, as people are wont to do. And Whitgar brooded. In the smoky confines of his hall, his power rested in the might of his spear arm that still bulged with sinewy muscles, the glittering coats of his men and the stout shields they carried. All this might was as nothing when the people needed food to fill their bellies and water to slake their thirst. And Whitgar brooded. His power, supreme in that of the village, was slipping in his mind, slipping to Dea, the woman of the woods who shared her healing, who shared her bounty. The raven-haired woman healed and nurtured, nursed and birthed. And Whitgar's anger and bitterness grew. On the moon of midsummer, he and his warriors, clad in glittering battle array, surrounded the small house in the woods, whose herbs grew pungent and deep. They called on her, the woman who nurtures and heals, to surrender herself to them for punishment of talking sedition about the Jarl. Surprised and shocked, Dea calmed her dogs, Gesemi and Nos, and stepped from the doorway, bowing to the angry lord. My Jarl, she said, indifference, bowing. What do I owe this honour of you and your men clad in shining war steel and weapons sharp? The Jarl scowled, and his coarse battle boot crushed a blossoming mantle of the lady. You, woman, foment rebellion and traitorous behaviour against me and mine. In my own village you will be held for trial, he grumbled, his feet stained with the sap of the crushed herbs. With the shock and with a shocked bow, the Raven One of the woods followed the mighty champions of battle to the pit of guilty, her slight arms bruised by rough war steel, and her night-black locks knocked free by the battle ash of the spears. And when soon as I was at its peak, the brooding Jarl stood on the law space and spoke of how Dea had tried to foment rebellion and hate, how her magic had caused the drought and famine, how her punishment would be to lose her home and to be cast into the woods. The people who had been nurtured and healed by Dea's touch were confused, and rightly so. The Jarl spoke with authority, and some they nodded their acceptance, and others they had anger and shock in their hearts and in their eyes, for this was not how it was done. Strife gauntlets and blood-stained battle fingers seized the wooded maid's store of potions and lotions, taken to the home of the Jarl to be his hoard of magic. The war-clad warriors, with raging infernos in their hands, threw fire into the thatch of Dea's home, and the twin dogs ran yelping into the woods. Warboot and coarse hand destroyed the medicine and herbs that grew in the peaceful garden, and the Jarl's judgment was done. Dea left the village, her necklace of silver and amber torn, her dress dirtied and her bangles jingling. And the people carried on with their lives. And, as the cycle of things come to be, the rains came, And Whitgar took this as his judgment being just. The crops grew and the game returned, and the people suffered. They needed the healing and nursing of the raven-haired woman of the woods. The crops grew, and so did the boils and the pus. Balms the woodwoman would have made were recreated with half-remembered stories. And Whitgar's hoard of liniment and potion ran dry, and his wounds ached. He demanded the women of the village make him more. Stories half told, songs half remembered, guided hands half knowing to make the potions. And that night, when the people presented the potion to their Jarl, he applied it and went to bed, knowing it was his due. And in the moon-kissed night, the Jarl awoke as Mani the moon was at his peak, full and beaming down, watching what would happen. Whitgar, lost in a fit of the most vile skin itch, reeled around his hall, searching desperately for relief from the torment of his skin. In his rage, he knocked down a torch into the rushes on the floor. Whitgar's itch did not last long, nor did the itch of his men, as flames consumed them, burned them, flames of their own making, of their own hubris. Watched from the woods and from the sky by two black dogs and a raven in the trees. And thank you for joining me for my story. And a story it is. Perhaps, maybe, a little bit of medicine for you. Have an amazing rest of the day. Big love.